Hello, and welcome to Learn Linux Now. I'm your host, Edward. This is session number 6, of which I start doing a little more of a deep dive into using desktop Linux. So this is going to be part 1 of a few episodes, actually, because in these sessions, this is where we start getting a little bit more advanced in our discussion of using Linux. Now, if you've caught up and you've watched my previous sessions, we've discussed about installing Linux either on a physical or a virtual machine, and hopefully you've done that by now. And some of this, that I go over, you may have already have some experience with or knowledge of, but hopefully some of you who are watching this now may have no knowledge or any experience at all of these concepts of using Linux and the desktop Linux itself. And we're going to do more sessions later on where I get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty, get our hands dirty, where we learn some more advanced topics of using Linux, especially when we start going over the server and Linux in itself and using command line and stuff like that. So but for this session, I'm going to kind of walk around a little bit and show you the desktop Linux itself. I'm going to bring up my virtual machine here, and this is a Fedora 36 with a default install of Gnome, which is the default for Fedora workstation is the Gnome Desktop environment. Now, when you first boot up, you're going to be presented with a login screen. This is your typical display manager that is kind of used to communicate with something called X server. Some of you may know what this is, and some of you don't. And I'm going to do a little more deep dive later in discussing X and X server and X Windows and such. But when you're looking at this first login, this is the display manager for Gnome, or GDM as you will. And there's other display managers too for other desktop environments. For example, there's KDM, which is for KDE display manager, and there's a few other ones out there. There's LightDM. I believe Ubuntu uses LightDM for its login, for its display manager. But the purpose of the display manager is kind of to work hand in hand with the X server, and specifically with passing authentication to the X server. And that's where you're going to log in with your username and password. Now, I do want to point out here that with a desktop environment, or I'm sorry, with desktop Linux, is that you can actually install multiple desktop environments. You're not confined just to one desktop environment, but know that whatever you first install, like for example, this is Fedora with GNOME, your default display manager is going to be GDM. Now, if I were to have installed Fedora with KDE Plasma, the default display manager would have been KDM. And same goes for some of the other desktop environments, distributions in themselves. But when you first log in, before you actually log in, before you provide your password, you're going to be presented with your choices of desktop environments. And on this virtual machine, I've actually installed quite a few versions of a desktop environment, a Windows manager, and a stacking Windows manager. And I'll give you an example of those in a moment. But for now, we're just going to log into GNOME. And I'll walk you a little bit through using GNOME. I mean, at my previous session, I've actually went over installing and using applications, and it probably should, in retrospect, it probably should have gone through, should have been included with these sessions. But when you first log in, you're presented with your desktop, if you will. And with GNOME, you're automatically prompted for an activity. And what I mean by that is, as you see, say for example, if I push this this button, this selection here for activities, this is your desktop. This is how you navigate. And you can choose that again to either pull up your applications, or you can choose any of the other icons in your launcher here at the bottom. And you don't necessarily have to even select that with your mouse. You can even hit your super key, or as some of you may know it as the Windows key. Mac users would know it as the command key. And you can actually start typing in an application you're looking for, or file you may be looking for. And in this example, I just typed in Libre. If I wanted to choose Libre Writer, I could just hit enter, or if I can arrow over to the calc or Excel, if you will, and hit enter, I can launch that application. And that's pretty much how you navigate around GNOME as far as launching applications. And I'm going to go ahead and close out of that. And another thing I wanted to point out too, which seems to be a common practice with most operating systems, is navigating in a file manager, if you will. That's what they call it in the Linux world, is the file manager. For you Windows users, you may know it as File Explorer. So for GNOME, here's the icon here, or if you wanted to, you could just type in files, and you're presented with the icon. And this is what's called a file manager. And it is actually labeled as files, but it's also known as Nautilus. Nautilus is the file manager for this GNOME installation. And some of the other ones that that I have listed here, and as far as file managers, KDE uses Dolphin. XFCE uses Thunar, and so on and so forth. There's most desktop environments out there have their own file manager, and this is basically what you use for navigating either your home directory, where you have all your folders and your files, or even you can even go on the top level if you wanted to. Excuse me. This is if you wanted to, you can actually even go to the root of the computer itself, and I'll go over the actual file system structure in later sessions. But for the most part, that's how you navigate around in a desktop environment, is by using a file manager. Now, one other thing I wanted to go over, as I mentioned earlier, are window managers, and what I mean by that is it's just another, if you will, kind of I hate to even call it a desktop environment, because it's not really a desktop environment. It's just a means of navigating in a Linux installation. But an example of a window manager would be like what's called a stacking window manager, and that's where OpenBox comes into play. There's a few other ones out there. I'm gonna log in here and show you what's called a stacking window manager. And what it means, it's just basically an installation that's probably mostly designed for low resource desktop or even server out there, server computers who have very little resources as far as memory and CPU and video. So you're presented with a very basic interface. Now, to actually launch an application, all you simply do is right click on the desktop, and you're presented with a menu where you can actually navigate to your applications. And I'm gonna launch here an application. We'll open up Libre Writer. And as far as a stacking window manager, it's you can kind of think of it as the default desktop environment of GNOME or KDE or any of the other ones, in that they still, the windows still stack, if you will. They are pretty much go on will open on top of each other in a sense. Got some really low. This is my virtual machine. There's some low resources here, but you still are able to select your stacked windows. But again, there's OpenBox, there's Fluxbox, there's quite a few other stacking Windows managers out there that are designed for machines with low resources. And you can see it's actually pretty fast as far as navigating around the menu system, bringing up a terminal emulator. It's pretty quick. I'm going to log out of this, and now I'm going to show you another window manager, which is called would be under the realm of the tiling window manager. And I've discussed this in previous sessions. I've shown these in previous sessions, but I just want to kind of give you an idea, show even more of the differences between a stacking window manager and a tiling window manager. So I'm going to log into i3, which is one of the tiling managers out there, and there's a few other ones out there. There's Rat Poison, and then there's Awesome, and there's quite a few out there. One thing to note if you wanted to check out Rat Poison is that you don't have a mouse at all. You don't have a cursor. No, I'm sorry, not a cursor. You don't have the mouse arrow. You don't have any mouse functions whatsoever. It all relies on keyboard and keyboard shortcuts. Now when I log into i3, I've actually already got this kind of pre-configured, but this is i3. This is what's called a tiling window manager, and it's actually pretty performant in of itself. I mean, it's pretty minimal. You're not presented with a lot of bells and whistles, kind of like the the stacking window manager. And as far as the differences as far as the Windows is concerned, is if I wanted to open, so the super key ND opens up the application launcher, but if I wanted to open up another window, you'll notice that the window doesn't stack on top of the other window. It's almost like a grid, if you will. It'll open up on the right hand side, and if I were to open up another application, we'll open up LibreOffice. It'll open up again on the side. It won't stack on top of the window, and you actually can configure i3. If I wanted to, I could actually have opened it at at the bottom of one of these other windows instead of over to the right. But i3 is actually very highly configurable. You can configure it in a lot of ways. If I had wanted to, I could have opened up Firefox in another workspace. And what I mean by that, if you look here at the very bottom, right now we are on workspace 1. This entire interface here is considered a workspace, and I can actually have it open up another workspace, and I can flip back and forth between the two workspaces. And so it's very highly configurable. It's, in my opinion, once you get it's all about muscle memory because you're using a lot of keyboard shortcuts to navigate around i3 and any of the other tiling Windows managers. So those are the different types of window managers out there. I'm going to go ahead and exit out if I can remember how to do this. It's been a while. There. So that is i3, and again, that's just a tip of the iceberg of what we're going to be discussing about for desktop Linux. But for now, we're going to kind of cut it short here, kind of keep the video as short as I can, and I hope you'll come back for the next sessions where we go a little bit further into using desktop Linux. But until then, I hope you will be kind and take care of yourself.